It symbolized power, prestige, and traditions. But for Veronica, it was nothing more than a golden cage where her dignity was trampled day after day. Veronica hurried through the long corridors of the house with her gaze lowered. The dining hall was full of guests, powerful figures from the world of business and high society. The evening was not just an ordinary dinner. It was a celebration in honor of her husband Alexei's achievements, a man who despised her without a drop of regret. She had spent the entire day ensuring that every dish was perfect, that every glass sparkled. But none of it mattered because in the eyes of Alexei and his mother, Sergeyevna, she meant absolutely nothing. "Hurry up, will you?" Antonina Sergeyevna spat, crossing her arms over her chest with an expression of disgust. "You can't even set the table properly. What a disgrace." Some of the guests exchanged uneasy glances, but no one said a word. They were used to seeing Veronica treated like a servant in her own home. Alexei, sitting at the head of the table, didn't even glance at her. He was too busy smiling and chatting with Regina, a beautiful lawyer who acted as if she were the hostess of the evening. Veronica swallowed her bitterness, fully aware of who Regina was and what her presence meant. With trembling hands, she attempted to pour wine into her husband's glass. A fatal mistake. "What is wrong with you, Veronica?" Alexei barked, jumping to his feet. All eyes turned to her. Her face burned with shame. "I'm sorry, it was an accident," she whispered. "An accident? You're useless." He threw back at her with irritation, shaking off the spill as if relishing her humiliation. Antonina Sergeyevna clicked her tongue in disdain and shook her head. "I told you, my son, this woman was never your equal. And yet, you married her. Here's your result." Those words were like daggers to Veronica's heart. She felt the ground slipping beneath her feet. She scanned the room, searching for a trace of sympathy, but found only indifferent faces and judging eyes. Then she heard a sob. Sophia, her little daughter, stood at the far end of the hall, her eyes red from crying, her lips trembling. "Mama," the girl whispered, her voice broken. A sharp pain gripped Veronica, stealing her breath. They weren't just humiliating her. They were humiliating her daughter. But Alexei wasn't done. With a rough gesture, he grabbed the wine bottle and poured its contents over Veronica. The cold liquid soaked her skin, drenching her face. "This actually suits you better," Alexei sneered, throwing the bottle aside. The sound of glass rolling across the floor echoed through the hall like wildfire. Veronica stood trembling, unable to move. "Get out of here. You've ruined the evening," Alexei added with a cold indifference that shattered her even more. Antonina Sergeyevna smirked, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Veronica couldn't breathe. She looked into her daughter's eyes. There was such deep, piercing pain in them that it tore her apart. She couldn't live like this anymore. Something inside her broke that night. She turned on her heels, soaked, humiliated, shattered, but with something new inside her. Determination. Without another word, she took Sophia's hand and headed for the exit. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was taking control of her life. The air in the Petrovsky estate was thick and suffocating. After the humiliation at dinner, Veronica spent hours locked in the bathroom. She sat on the cold tiled floor, still in her wine-soaked clothes, her heart shattered, her hands trembling. She didn't know if she was shaking from anger, helplessness, or the deep sorrow that consumed her from within. Sophia had fallen asleep on her bed after crying all her tears out. Veronica held her, whispering a promise, one she didn't yet know how to keep. She couldn't continue living like this. Not after everything that had happened. That night, when she finally left the bathroom, the house was silent. Alexei wasn't in their bedroom. That didn't surprise her. In recent months, he had been staying out more and more, using business trips and important meetings as excuses. But after what happened at dinner, after seeing Regina by his side, Veronica could no longer ignore the suspicions that had been tormenting her heart for years. For the first time in a long time, she decided to seek the truth. With a pounding heart, She crept downstairs to her husband's office. The door was slightly ajar. Veronica entered cautiously, her palms sweaty with tension. Alexei's phone lay on the desk. He never left it unattended. He was too careful. But tonight, it seemed he had forgotten. Veronica picked up the phone. The screen lit up. A new message from Regina. "I'm waiting for you, my love. Don't be late." Her vision blurred with tears. Her fingers trembled as she opened the conversation. There were hundreds of messages, photos, videos, words of love that Alexei had long stopped saying to her, promises he now gave to another. These were undeniable proofs. The proof of his betrayal hit Veronica like a storm. The man to whom she had given her youth, her love, her life, was deceiving her without shame or conscience. Not only did he deceive her, but he also humiliated her in front of his mistress in their own home. A wave of fury overwhelmed her. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She got into the car and sped out of the house. She knew exactly where to go. The most luxurious hotel in the city glittered with golden lights in its massive windows. Veronica parked the car haphazardly and stormed into the hotel as if she were a tempest. She didn't need to ask at the reception. She knew exactly where to find Alexei. Reaching the right floor, she saw the door slightly ajar. Laughter and muffled voices could be heard from inside. She knocked so hard that the echo reverberated down the hallway. Alexei appeared in the doorway, barefoot with his shirt unbuttoned, and behind him stood Regina, wrapped in a silk sheet. For a moment, no one said a word. Then Alexei sighed heavily, irritation clear in his voice. "What are you doing here?" There was no guilt, no regret in his voice, only contempt. Regina smirked. "Well, this is awkward," she said, as if relishing the moment. Veronica felt her blood boil. "You bastard," she screamed and tried to strike him in the chest. But Alexei grabbed her wrist with force. "Don't make a scene." Hysteric, he gritted through his teeth. Veronica pulled away from his grasp. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You cheated on me, treated me like garbage. And now you expect me to stay silent. What did you expect, Veronica?" Alexei sneered. "You're boring. You're good for nothing. Regina is a real woman, not like you. You're only good for cleaning and looking after kids." Those words struck Veronica like a blow to the heart. This was how he saw her. Regina laughed and leaned against the doorframe. "You should be grateful to me, dear." Veronica felt her breath catch in her chest. She had endured humiliation and insults for years, but this was too much. Alexei crossed his arms over his chest. "If you want to leave, leave. But don't expect to take anything with you." Veronica felt something break inside her. "I don't need anything from you," she whispered, holding back tears. "The only thing I'll take is my daughter." "And my daughter," Alexei replied with a smirk. "You don't care about her. You don't even look at her." He remained silent because it was true. Veronica looked at him one last time and realized that the man she had once loved was now a stranger to her. She turned around and walked out of the hotel. The cold night wind hit her face as she got behind the wheel. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, shaking with anger and humiliation. Alexei had betrayed her without even trying to hide it, but what hurt the most was that he considered her insignificant. The drive home was long, but in Veronica's mind, a new plan was taking shape. When she returned home, the sky was starting to lighten with the first rays of dawn. She drove into the driveway with her heart clenched in anger and pain. Her hands trembled, but inside, determination was growing. She knew she couldn't stay there another minute. However, when she opened the door, she was met by Antonina Sergeevna. She was sitting in a large armchair in the living room, a glass of brandy in hand, with a smirk on her face, as if she had been expecting Veronica's return. "Well, you're back," Antonina Sergeevna sneered, adjusting her expensive silk scarf. "Went looking for Alexei. I see. Saw him with Regina?" Veronica closed her eyes, trying to hold back the rage. "I know everything. she said quietly, not turning around. Antonina Sergeyevna laughed loudly, the sound echoing through the empty corridors. Of course, you've always known. You just pretended that you had a marriage, that you were Mrs. Petrovskaya. But in reality, you were always nothing, a peasant woman who thought she could be part of our family. Veronica's eyes blazed with fury. Alexei cheated on me right in front of me, and you let it happen in my own home. Antonina Sergeyevna stood up slowly and approached her. Her gaze was full of contempt. What did you expect? That he would tolerate someone like you forever? My son needs a real woman, not some village girl he picked out of pity. Those words were like a knife to Veronica's heart. She could no longer allow herself to be weak. She clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. I've tolerated your insults and humiliation for far too long, but no more. I'm leaving. Antonina Sergeyevna sneered. Leave, by all means. But where will you go? You have no money, no family, no friends. You're nothing. Do you think you can take Sophia with you? Never. We won't allow it. Veronica felt her heart freeze. Sophia, my daughter. I won't leave her with you. Antonina Sergeyevna laughed. She's a Petrovskaya. She'll stay in the family. You're just a mistake of my son's. No one will remember you once you step out the door. Those words might have broken her before, but not now. Veronica took a deep breath, suppressing the urge to scream. She looked Antonina Sergeyevna straight in the eyes and coldly said, I'm going upstairs to get Sophia. And if you try to stop me, I'll make sure the world knows what you really are. Antonina Sergeyevna smirked with contempt. Let's see if you have the courage. Without wasting another moment, Veronica rushed upstairs. She entered Sophia's room and saw her little girl peacefully sleeping, hugging her stuffed bear. Veronica's heart tightened with pain, but it was also filled with love. She carefully lifted Sophia into her arms, trying not to wake her. Sophia sighed softly in her sleep, pressing closer to her mother's chest. Veronica's mother descended the stairs, holding her head high. Antonina Sergeyevna sat in the same spot, watching her with a mocking smile. You are destroying the door and turning away from life, she said, rather than staying your prisoner. With these words, she left the house. She got into the car without looking back and drove away from everything that once seemed like home. She lost everything: status, comfort, family, but she gained the most important thing: freedom. The sun barely appeared on the horizon when Veronica crossed the entrance to Yaroslavl. She had been driving for several hours without stopping, her eyes swollen from tears, and Sophia was asleep in the back seat, unaware of the chaos they had left behind. Veronica had no plan, no money, no place to go, but she had freedom, and that was all she had left. The streets of Yaroslavl stretched before her. Ancient buildings and lively squares contrasted with her inner state. Nobody knew who she had been in the past, but reality quickly reminded her. She parked the car on a quiet street and dropped her head onto the steering wheel. She had no home, no job, no future. Mommy, a soft voice came from the back seat. Veronica quickly wiped her tears and turned to her daughter with a smile. Good morning, she said, looking out the window with curiosity. Where are we? Sophia asked. Veronica swallowed hard. Sweetheart, this is where we will start over, she replied. Sophia frowned. And Dad? Veronica's heart tightened in pain. Dad stayed at home. Now it's just us, me and you. For a moment, the girl hesitated, then hugged her mother's neck tightly. I don't want to go back there. Those words were like balm to Veronica's wounded soul. She held back tears and hugged her daughter tightly in return. I don't want to go back either, darling. but we had to act. She started the car and drove through the city, searching for a temporary refuge. Hotels were too expensive, and there was hardly any money left. Then, she remembered the church she had seen at the entrance to the city center. Maybe they could help them there. Veronica approached the old church with its whitewashed walls and darkened wooden dome. Narrow windows decorated with simple stained glass let soft rays of evening sunlight inside. She turned off the engine and looked at Sophia, who was sleepily rubbing her eyes, clutching her teddy bear to her chest. "Let's go, sweetheart," Veronica said gently, taking her daughter's hand. They slowly walked up to the large oak doors. Veronica hesitantly pulled the heavy iron handle, and the door creaked open. Inside, the scent of wax and incense filled the air. The dark wooden floor gleamed in the light of numerous candles, and the icons on the walls gazed at them with silent calm. The silence was so deep that every step echoed. At the altar stood an elderly priest with a kind but weary gaze. His gray hair was neatly combed back, framing his face with a beard, and his eyes radiated warmth. "Good day," he said in a warm voice. "I am Father Matvey. How can I help you?" Veronica lowered her gaze, feeling the weight of everything she had been through. The words caught in her throat. "Hello," she said, her voice trembling. "We need a place to stay for the night. We have no one and nowhere to stay." Father Matvey looked at her intently, then at Sophia, who was tightly holding her hand, hiding her face behind her mother's shoulder. His expression softened, and he stepped forward. "Tell me what brought you here and what happened," he said gently, folding his hands on his lap and looking at Veronica with understanding. Veronica lowered her eyes, trying to hold back her tears. Her voice was quiet but full of emotion. "We have no home anymore," she began. "I left my husband. He treated me like I was nothing, humiliated me in public, and cheated on me without hiding it. And his mother," her voice faltered, "she hated me from the start." She took a deep breath, looking at Sophia, who was still tightly holding her hand. "I couldn't take it anymore. I took my daughter and left. I have no money, no job, no home. I just didn't know where else to go." Father Matvey listened to her without interrupting. His face reflected sympathy, not pity, just understanding and quiet strength. "You know, Veronica," he said softly, "God never leaves us, even in the darkest times. And when it seems like everything is lost, it might be the beginning of a new path." He paused for a moment, then added, "We have a small shelter at the church. It's simple but warm and safe. You and your daughter can stay there as long as you need. I am sure you will manage because you have the most important thing, love for your child and the strength to fight." Veronica felt tears of relief running down her cheeks. She hugged Sophia tightly. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Father Matvey smiled. His eyes shone with a warm light. "Gratitude is not needed. Helping each other brings us closer to God. Now, come, I will show you to your room." He stood and led them down a narrow corridor to a small door. He opened it, gesturing for them to enter. It was a simple place, a narrow bed with clean sheets, an old wardrobe, and a small window overlooking an inner courtyard where modest flowers bloomed. But for Veronica and Sophia, it was an island of safety that gave them hope. Veronica sat on the bed, holding Sophia, and looked at Father Matvey. "Thank you. You've given us more than just a roof over our heads. You've given us hope." The priest nodded and gently replied, "Sometimes hope is the most important thing we have." When the door closed behind them, Veronica finally felt like she could breathe. She sank onto the bed, holding her daughter tightly. It was temporary, she knew that. She couldn't stay there forever. They needed stability. They needed a new life. The next day, Veronica set out to find work. She visited dozens of places, cafes, stores, hotels, and everywhere she received the same responses. We need an experienced employee. Sorry, we're not hiring anyone right now. Despair grew with each rejection. But then she accepted a job she never would have considered before. Washing dishes in a small cafe in the city center. They paid little, but at least they provided free meals. It was a chance to survive. The work was hard, standing at the sink for hours, her hands red from hot water and cleaning agents. But Veronica had no choice. It was time to look for a school for Sophia. The nearest one was private, and the middle-aged director with a cold gaze was adamant. We can't accept your daughter without documents and payment for tuition. Veronica felt everything inside her tighten. Please give us some time. I'll find a decent job and pay as soon as I can. Sorry, rules are rules, the director replied indifferently. Walking out of the school, Veronica squeezed her daughter's small hand, feeling like the world was crumbling beneath her feet. They stopped at the wall of an old building. Veronica closed her eyes, holding back tears. Mommy, Sophia said quietly, pulling her by the hand. Don't be sad. We'll make it. Veronica looked at her daughter and saw such strength and faith in her eyes that it gave her new strength. She took a deep breath and decided she wouldn't give up. That evening, as they walked down the street, tired and frozen, Veronica caught the warm scent of freshly baked goods from a bakery on the corner. Beautifully decorated pastries and buns were displayed in the window. She stopped without realizing it. Do you want to go in? A male voice suddenly asked from behind. Veronica turned and saw a young man with a smile and a thoughtful gaze. He was dressed simply, but there was kindness in his eyes. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, she said shyly. It's no problem, he replied. My name is Ilya. I'm the owner of this bakery. Here, try this. He handed her a small bun wrapped in a napkin. Veronica hesitated, but took the treat. It was the most delicious bun she had ever eaten. Ilya smiled. If you liked it, I can teach you how to make them. I'm actually looking for a helper at the bakery. The most important thing is the desire to learn. Veronica couldn't believe her ears. You're offering me a job? If you're interested, of course, Ilya answered with a light smile. Tears welled up in Veronica's eyes. This time, however, it was tears of relief. Yes, yes, please. It was the beginning of a new chapter in her life. The morning of a new day brought not fear, but a gentle hope. For the first time in a long while, she woke up with the feeling that maybe everything wasn't as hopeless as it had seemed. Sophia was still fast asleep on the small bed in the church. Her hair was messy and peaceful. Veronica leaned over her, gently ran her hand over Sophia's cheek, and whispered, "Today is a new day, my girl." She carefully dressed in the cleanest and tittiest clothes she had left, faded jeans and a simple white blouse. This was her first working day at Ilya's bakery, and although she felt a little nervous inside, determination burned within her. She had to make it, for herself and for Sophia. When she arrived at the bakery, Ilya was already there, carefully placing freshly baked rolls on the counter. The air was filled with the aromas of vanilla, cinnamon, and fresh bread. "Good morning," he smiled, noticing her. "Are you ready to start?" Veronica nodded. "Ready." Ilya led her to the kitchen, where large bags of flour, dough, and heated ovens awaited. There, a man in his 50s with thick mustache was working, whom Ilya introduced as Nikolai Petrovich, the head baker. "This is Nikolai Petrovich. He will show you the basics, Ilya said. Nikolai Petrovich looked at Veronica with a strict gaze and muttered, "No slackers here. We work, not waste time." Veronica straightened up, holding back her embarrassment. "I'll try my best," she said. He tossed her an apron and pointed to the workbench. "Let's begin." The first day turned out to be much harder than she expected. The dough stuck to her hands, the hot ovens were exhausting, and she was criticized for every mistake. "What kind of shape is this?" "This isn't bread, it's some kind of pancake," he grumbled, watching her clumsy attempts. Veronica felt embarrassed by her mistakes, but she gritted her teeth and kept going. She knew she couldn't afford to give up. By midday, her hands ached painfully and her back throbbed from the strain. She accidentally dropped a tray of cookies, and the crash echoed in the kitchen. Her eyes filled with tears, but she wiped them away with her sleeve. Ilya approached her with a kind smile. "No one becomes a master in one day. You're doing great, Veronica. The most important thing is not to give up." These words acted like balm for her soul. She took a deep breath, straightened up, and resumed working. When the workday ended, Ilya handed her an envelope with her first paycheck. It wasn't a large sum, but for Veronica, it meant the world. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "Thank you for your perseverance," Ilya replied. Veronica returned to the shelter with a small bag of bread and milk that she had bought on the way. Sophia was already waiting for her, and happily threw herself into her arms. "Mommy, did you make the bread yourself?" "Almost," Veronica smiled. "But soon I'll learn to make it the right way." Sophia took a bite and happily smiled at the taste. Those simple words warmed her heart more than any luxurious dinner in the past. The next day started with the same routine. Early in the morning, fatigue, mistakes, but with each attempt, her movements became more confident, and her mistakes less frequent. Nikolai Petrovich, though still strict, became a bit gentler, sometimes even showing her how to roll the dough properly or how to place bread on the baking sheet. Weeks passed, and Veronica had already learned to bake soft cinnamon rolls, beautiful pies, and even started learning to make complex cakes. Her hands no longer trembled from uncertainty, and inside her grew pride for her accomplishments. Ilya often watched her with a warm smile, offering advice and support. "You have talent," he once said. "You just need to believe in yourself." These words warmed her heart more than she wanted to admit. But peace couldn't last forever. One day, returning from work, she saw an envelope left at the door of the shelter. Inside was an official letter. Veronica's heart clenched when she saw the stamp of a law firm. It was a court summons. Alexei had filed for sole custody of Sophia. The world, once again, crumbled beneath her feet. She sank to the floor, clutching the paper in her hands, realizing that the fight was just beginning. Veronica couldn't understand how Alexei had found them. She hadn't told anyone where they were living, had been careful not to attract attention. But deep down, she knew he wouldn't leave her in peace so easily. That evening, sitting on the hard mattress in her small room at the church, she tried to make sense of what had happened, and suddenly she remembered an incident from a week ago when she was returning from the bakery. It had seemed like someone was watching her. A black car parked by the neighboring building had been there for several days. She had chalked it up to exhaustion and anxious thoughts, but now she realized it was no coincidence. Other details came to mind. Strange calls from unknown numbers, silence on the other end when she answered. Even in the bakery, a man in an expensive coat had come in a couple of times, and Ilya had thought him to be just a regular customer. Now Veronica understood. It was no random visitor. She realized Alexei must have hired a private detective. He had always known how to use his money and connections to control people. He had probably used his position to gain access to databases and track her down, perhaps even following her through acquaintances or shelter staff who had no idea. Rage bubbled up in her chest. He was once again trying to take away the one thing that meant the most to her. But if he thought she would give up so easily, he was wrong. "Mommy, are you okay?" came Sophia's little voice from the doorway, clutching her teddy bear. Veronica quickly wiped her tears and forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just tired." She hugged her daughter tightly, feeling not fear, but rage inside. No, she would never give up Sophia. The next morning, Veronica went to work, the summons in her bag, reminding her that she had to fight. Ilya immediately noticed her downcast demeanor. "What happened?" he asked, setting down a basket of hot bread on the counter. Veronica paused, took a deep breath, and pulled out the envelope, placing it on the counter. At the table, Alexei filed a lawsuit for custody of Sophia. Ilya read the letter, and his face darkened. He clenched his lips, trying to hold back his emotions. He didn't finish his sentence, but Veronica understood what he meant. "You are not alone in this fight. I will help you in any way I can." These words warmed her heart, but she knew she needed legal assistance. After her shift, she visited several law firms and heard the same thing everywhere. "You don't have a stable income, no permanent residence. This will be difficult." Despair gripped her, until in a small law office, she met Artem Valerievich, an elderly lawyer with piercing eyes and a tired face. "I'll help you," he said after listening to her story. "It won't be easy. Alexei, I understand, is a man with money and connections, but sometimes truth is stronger than power." Veronica squeezed his hand, barely holding back tears of gratitude. "I am ready to do anything. To start, you need stable housing and proof of income," added the lawyer. Veronica nodded, knowing she had to act fast. The next day, she told Ilya about the need to find a place to live. "I can help," he said after a brief pause. "I have a small apartment I used to rent, but it's free now. Pay what you can, and if you can't, don't worry." Veronica felt tears well up in her eyes, but she held them back. "Thank you. I won't forget this." In a few days, she and Sophia moved into a small but cozy apartment. She signed the rental agreement and found another part-time job cleaning offices in the evenings. It was exhausting. Then came the day of the trial. The courtroom was cold and lifeless. Alexei sat confidently with his expensive lawyer and his eternal smirk, as if he already knew he would win. Veronica sat across from him, holding Sophia's hand. The judge began the hearing, and a tense silence filled the room, broken only by the rustling of papers. Alexei's lawyer, a tall, self-satisfied man in a perfectly pressed suit, stood up and began his speech with great pomp, looking at the judge as if the outcome was already decided. "Honorable court," he began confidently, straightening his shoulders and looking around the room with an arrogant glance. "We are dealing with a person whose reputation is impeccable. My client, Alexei Petrovich Petrov. He is not just a successful entrepreneur. He is a man who has achieved everything through hard work. He owns a stable business, provides jobs, pays taxes, and contributes to the development of our society." He paused, giving weight to his words, and continued, "My client is a person who can provide his daughter not only with financial stability but also quality education, health care, and proper conditions for her development. His home has everything: comfort, security, educational resources. He is able to hire the best teachers and provide the child with everything necessary for a successful future." The lawyer turned to Alexei, who sat with a stone face, exuding cold superiority. Alexei Petrovich is a model of responsible parenting. He is a man with an impeccable business reputation and high moral standards. He can give the child what the mother cannot: stability, a permanent residence, and a clear future. The lawyer paused again, and then added with a smirk, "We are not talking about feelings, Your Honor, but about facts. And the facts are clear. The child is better off with her father." The lawyer's words hung in the air, heavy with pressure, crushing Veronica. She felt her heart tighten with pain and anger. Then it was Veronica's turn. Artem Valerievich stood and calmly began speaking. "Honorable court, my client is not just a mother. She is a woman who managed to survive emotional abuse, retain warmth in her heart, and love for her daughter. She doesn't have millions in her bank account, but she has something more important: care, love, and the willingness to give everything for her child's happiness." The judge listened carefully. When it was time for Veronica to speak, she stood, holding back a tremor, and looked directly at the judge. "I am not a perfect mother," she began, "but I love my daughter more than anything in the world. I am ready to work day and night to provide her with everything she needs, but if you take Sophia from me, I will lose not just a child, I will lose my heart." A silence descended upon the room. The judge took a pause to consider the case. The weight was unbearable. Veronica clenched her hands so tightly that her nails left marks on her skin. A few days later, she received a summons to court for the verdict. When the judge entered the room, Veronica's heart was pounding. After considering all the facts and circumstances, the judge started flipping through the papers. The judge said, "I am awarding custody of Sophia to her mother, Veronica Sergeevna." These words echoed in her mind. She barely realized that she had won. She hugged Sophia tightly, tears of relief streaming down her face. Alexei jumped up. His face turned red with rage, his eyes gleaming with fury. He shoved his chair aside, making it crash to the floor, unable to control his emotions. He screamed at Veronica, "This is absurd!" His voice trembled with anger. "How can you believe this woman? She's nobody. She ran away with my daughter like a thief. She has no money, no status, no stability. She's a pitiful failure who couldn't even keep a family together." He stepped forward, no longer addressing the judge, but speaking to everyone in the room. "I gave her everything: a home, wealth, a name. And what did she do? She thought she could handle things without me. Look at her. She's trying to make me look bad to play the victim. But she's no victim. I'm the victim here, victimized by her whims and weakness." Veronica clenched her fists, trying not to let his provocations get to her. Every word was like a blow, but now she knew. It wasn't strength, it was fear. Fear of losing control. The judge, tapping his gavel, tried to regain order. "Mr. Petrov, calm down," he said, but Alexei wasn't listening. "You're all blind," he shouted, his voice rising. "I'm her father. I can give Sophia everything she needs. I won't let my daughter grow up in poverty with a woman who couldn't even save her own marriage." The judge tapped the gavel again, more forcefully. "Mr. Petrov, I ask you to leave the courtroom." Alexei's glare was full of hatred as he left the room. Veronica no longer feared him. She had won. Leaving the courtroom, Veronica held Sophia's hand so tightly as if afraid her daughter might disappear. Tears flowed down her cheeks, not from pain, but from victory. She had won a battle that seemed hopeless. Alexei exited the courtroom with a look of pure malice, but he was just a man who had lost control over her. When they stepped outside, Ilya was waiting by the entrance to the court. Seeing them, he immediately understood They had won. "I knew you could do it," he said with a proud smile. Veronica nodded, unable to say a word. Instead, she just hugged Ilya. It was a warm, sincere hug, and he had supported her from the very beginning. Life slowly started to return to its routine. The bakery where Veronica worked began to flourish. Ilya offered her a full partnership in the business, and together they started growing the business. The bakery transformed into a cozy place where people came not only for delicious pastries, but for the warmth and kindness in the atmosphere. She went to a new school, where she quickly made friends. She was no longer afraid to smile. Her childish eyes once again shone with happiness. Veronica was proud of every success she had, knowing that all of this was made possible because of her fight. One evening, when the bakery closed and the city fell into silence, Ilya approached Veronica as she was washing the tables. "You know, from the very beginning, I believed in you," he said softly. Veronica froze, then slowly turned to him. "I know," she whispered. Ilya stepped closer, his gaze warm and tender. "You are no longer alone. I want to be by your side. If you're ready." Veronica's heart beat faster. She looked into his eyes and saw not pity, not sympathy, but respect and sincere affection. She started, but Ilya smiled gently. "You don't need to answer right now. Just know that I'm here." Veronica smiled in return, for the first time in a long time feeling that the past no longer held her in its tight grip. Several months passed. The bakery thrived, and Veronica's life became calm and stable. She found the strength not only to survive the pain, but to build a new, happy life. One morning, when she was having breakfast with Sophia, the little girl suddenly asked, "Mama, are you happy?" Veronica looked at her daughter. The sunlit kitchen, the hot tea, and the aroma of freshly baked goods. "Yes, sweetie, I'm happy," she said, because now she was free. She no longer lived in the shadow of her past. She had created her own future, full of love, hope, and warmth. Thank you for listening to the story till the end. Don't forget to leave your opinion about this story. Subscribe to the channel Tell Me, and share this video with your friends and family. It motivates us to continue working on new stories every day. Don't miss the next amazing story, which will soon appear on your screen. We are very grateful to you for being with us. In the description under this video, you can open the catalog of all stories. See you soon.